Good morning, everyone. Amanda Baker here with Visit North Carolina. Excited to have you all joining our session. This is going to be the Outdoor NC accessibility program we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. We got a couple of people on the call with us today, including Hannah, who's a West Virginia University student, as well as Amanda with Visit Blowing Rock. So today we're going to be talking about the Outdoor NC Accessible Outdoor Program, which aims to increase information transparency so individuals can make informed decisions about exploring North Carolina's outdoor spaces based on their abilities. During this webinar, we'll discuss a tool that is a part of a suite of tools for the Accessible Outdoors flagship program. This tool is created as a result of a 14-week project and will be free to partners and stakeholders throughout the state. This full suite of tools will launch in late May. And if you missed attending the Outdoor NC workshop that we held this fall, or a breakout session at the Visit NC Tourism Conference last month, or if you're not a part of our Destination Stewardship Trail Town program, it is recommended that you start with some of our other tools in the toolkit to ensure a strong foundation moving forward. The toolkit will include additional guidance and tools to help make your destination and outdoor spaces more accessible. It will contain an ADA asset inventory sheet, accessible outdoor communication guidance, a presentation on accessibility, as well as recorded webinars and resources. This Accessible Outdoors program is a great example of what can be achieved through collaboration. It began with research and has grown thanks to our partnerships. We created the Accessible Outdoors program with Bobby Chappelle from Tourism Impact Services and further developed in collaboration with Hannah, a WV student and native of North Carolina. Marlise Taylor, Bobby Chappelle, and myself served as Hannah's project mentors during this time. We want to thank our partners who generously hosted Hannah and participated in the tool's field testing. Their invaluable contributions have been integral to this project, so thank you all. Hannah is a second-year occupational therapy doctoral student at West Virginia University, and she contacted Visit NC to discuss her capstone experience topic. She was interested in exploring ways to improve travel for people with disabilities in North Carolina and make the state's sites and experiences more accessible for everyone. Her objectives aligned with our North Carolina new Accessible Outdoors program, and is an example of positive change we can make in our communities. This project was also a first for our organization as EDPNC and Visit North Carolina in working with a student or university in this way. It presented a few challenges with logistics and contracts, but it's well worth working through those to allow for future opportunities with universities and students. If you're currently interacting with colleges or university students, I would suggest that you consider exploring opportunities and different programs beyond the traditional ones, say tourism or hospitality, that you typically work with. This can really encourage collaboration and communication across professions and industries, leading to creative solutions for addressing community challenges. So I encourage you to find stakeholders who share in your mission and have a common goal. They may have that different perspective or help with accomplishing your goals while exponentially expanding your resources and bandwidth. So in summation of all of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Hannah to share more about her capstone experience with Visit North Carolina, the development of the tool, and some helpful tips. So Hannah, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Amanda, for that introduction. So today, like Amanda said, we'll kind of be covering the project overview. We're going to go into a little bit of a review on disability as a whole. I'll dive into the broad findings of the trail assessment, and then we'll share the results from the partner survey that we sent out at the end of each trail assessment, and then actually hear a lived experience from one of our partners at the end. There will be time for a Q&A, so if you want to drop them into the chat as we go so we don't forget, or if you just want to hold on to those questions for at the end. So starting with the capstone process, this capstone really required relating theories of practice that I use as an occupational therapist to be applied for in-depth knowledge into one practice area. So when we're looking at this capstone specifically and looking at a non-traditional setting for an occupational therapist to look at the accessibility of trails outdoors, we participated in a needs assessment where I sat down with Amanda and other people from the team and really figured out where we could go from here and then turn that into a SWOT analysis. So when we were looking at some of the strengths that Visit NC has to offer, they're actively involved with the mission of making travel more accessible. They're also actively involved in providing tools for local destinations and partners that can help empower them to market their destinations to visitors with different abilities. We decided on the weakness altogether that there's obviously competition between North Carolina and other states from accessibility and marketing that accessibility travel option. So that's definitely something that I was really passionate about wanting to help them fix. So those shared goals with our different lenses really helped us align for our literature review. So we did go into more research to find out where we could go next with that. So our research question, you'll see here on the screen, we had a total of about 15 articles that were carefully considered and analyzed for that literature review. So the marketing-based materials showed that advertising accessibility is being held to a wide variety of standards. We'll go into those standards specifically and the way that those needs are being addressed. The consistency that we saw among those articles, standard ranging of ADA requirements, providing ramps, just stating that access to disabilities or no disabilities with either further descriptions or less descriptions that were provided for that individual, and failing to kind of give those descriptions to state what accessibility they were presenting currently in the research material. Also having that information readily available for individuals when they're thinking about traveling and applying that to the doctoral capstone experience is kind of where we went next with it. So then a little bit of the schedule for the timeline of the capstone. So back in January is when I started my in-person work with Visit NC. So this was after the research had been done, after the literature review had been completed. We started completing the trail assessments. So we were able to complete 10. Those continued into February, and then we started to organize the data with all of the surveys that were completed along with the trail assessments. So we kind of looked at like what were the major things that we were seeing consistently. We completed the manuscript and documented all the trail assessments. And then at the end of the capstone, there will be webinars presented. This one as long as with a webinar that will go through the tool itself and teach you how to use it, show you little tips and tricks, and then also documents in case you're not able to watch that full webinar. And then dissemination coming up as well this month to present all of our findings. So going into disability a little bit as a whole, I think it's really important to just kind of note that when we are thinking about this capstone, a lot of times in the material that we were looking at in the literature review, it was from a physical disability standpoint, but disability as a whole goes much further than that. 1 in 4 adults in the United States will have some sort of disability in their lifetime. So just really looking at the visual, physical, cognitive, auditory, and social impacts, which all impact an individual's ability to function or participate in their everyday life. This can obviously mean going outside. So an individual may also experience just one or multiple of these at a certain time or across time. So that's just one of the things. So going into, obviously, we can start with a mobility or a physical impairment, which impacts an individual's ability to produce either gross motor movements or fine motor movements. So those can be things like gripping or manipulating objects. So when we're thinking about trail accessibility, an individual with a mobility impairment might have a hard time with using the bathroom or amenities, different elevation gains, different changes in ground surface, gripping the bathroom or gripping a water station. Those are the kind of things that we were thinking about from a mobility perspective. When we're thinking about a cognitive disability, these impact an individual's ability to remember, concentrate, make decisions, complete tasks, understand and follow directions. So if we're thinking about it from a trail accessibility perspective, an individual with a cognitive impairment may have trouble remembering directions on the trail. They might have trouble understanding signage or following a map, or if they do find themselves lost, kind of wayfinding their way back. Going into an auditory impairment, so this impacts an individual's ability to hear sounds, either partially or completely. So an individual with an auditory disability on a trail might have trouble with like possible dangers or disruptions along the trail. Specific amenities, if you have talk to text features on the trail, those could also be problems for them. An individual with a visional disability obviously has trouble with being able to see either partially or wholly. So if they're on a trail, they might have trouble seeing the signage. They might have trouble with the contrast of that signage, different light sensitivities along the trail. If there's any sort of reflectiveness off of any materials that are on the trail, and changes in surfaces with similar presentations, similar colors. And then lastly, we thought about it from an independent living or a self-care disability perspective. So a lot of times these individuals, it impacts their ability to take care of themselves, such as like dressing or bathing or other living tasks, like maybe driving or running errands. So a lot of times if we're thinking about an individual that may have a disability, they might also have a caregiver in this aspect. So if that caregiver is present, if they're coming on the trail with them, and what those accommodations might need to look like in that case. So when we created the assessment, these tools that you see on the screen were the three most utilized tools that I used. The Tennessee State Parks guide that you see to the left did an excellent job of describing specific trail features that I knew I'd want to use, and like what characteristics of those features met accessibility requirements for their specific guide. The one that you see in the middle, this one came from Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and it took a more of a universal design approach, but still did a really good job describing design standards and like trail elements and amenities. And then the accessibility checklist from the University of Washington that you see on the right was really useful because it followed an ADA standard with like questions and designs. But all the questions were set up in a yes or no fashion, which provided the consumer with one, a clear standard of if it was met or not, and two, like being able to complete it in a timely manner. So these were the three most commonly utilized tools when creating the assessment. Just once again, a huge thank you to all the partners who allowed me to come out and complete the trail assessment. Because of them, like we're able to get a wide variety of trails across the state and increase the number of people who can utilize or be trained on the assessment tool and how to complete it. So upon completion of the project, I do have high hopes that these areas and more will continue to utilize the assessment and share the findings with the public for increased transparency. Partners were invited to come out on the trail, so, and I will leave that to the partner that we have for you at the end today. So this is a little bit about what the trail assessment looks like. It was divided up into 5 sections that we'll go through today. So we're going to go through the most commonly seen things in each section. There are more, and like I said previously, a video and direction sheet outlining the full usage and how to utilize the tool will be sent out with its launch in May. So be looking for that. So these, once again, are the common findings. So first, starting with the parking lot, a lot of times we were looking at the location of the accessible parking. So a lot of times that we would notice that the trail sites had accessible parking, but maybe it wasn't located right near where the accessibility walk was. So the way to get from the parking lot to where the trail actually started was maybe not the most accessible. And then clear sidewalk entrances to the start of the trail. We were looking at the restroom. We did get a lot of questions about weights of doors and how hard is it to pull a door, and like what kind of handle should you look for when having a door. So that was a big one. The lighting, I will say most trails did have indoor lighting, which was great. A lot of times if an individual does have a disability that requires them to do medical attention either hourly or every so many hours, the bathroom is always the cleanest, most sanitary place to do that, just so they can wash their hands. They're able to see well. So that was really good. The location of being able to flush the toilet, where's that located? That was a big thing that we looked at. Gender neutral bathrooms, and that kind of goes back to that caregiver perspective. So if you have a caregiver that is a different gender than you, are they able to go into the bathroom together? What does that look like? And then also signage outside of the bathroom. So some places had accessible bathrooms, some didn't, and they had signage outside that said it was accessible, and vice versa. So looking at that signage so an individual knows before entering the restroom. And then going into signage specifically, so this goes for signs that were either along the trail at the beginning of the trail that maybe showed a map, or if they handed out brochures along the way. So looking at the contrast and visibility of those, there's a lot of stuff that comes out in the webinar about how to look at contrast, how to view visibility, what sizing and font you should have for the distance or width that an individual might be looking at it. One of the big things also with this was the location of the signage. So from where you're viewing the sign, can you see it? But for an individual that maybe needs to get closer, is it feasible for them to get closer? If they can't get closer, is there a way for them to position themselves to see it better? That was a big one. And then directional challenges. So just how many directions were there on one? How long do you have to go before you see another map or before you get another direction? How long would a typical person have to remember those directions? So looking at that kind of stuff. Moving into the trail features specifically, we looked at the cross and running slope. We looked at different surface challenges and made notes of all the surfaces that an individual might present or see on the trail. Going through signage along the trail again, and then a loop trail with visibility to the starts. So I'm going to let Amanda touch on that later as well. Art or familiar objects on the trails, just kind of giving that mental health perspective of like, are you noticing anything familiar? Are you following it? I did see one trail, they did a really nice thing where they had a book and one page of the book was in a glass container and you only had to walk probably about 20 or 30 feet before you could see the next page. How often do you have a bench or a rest stop? Are those benches or rest stops, do they have handles? Are they covered? Is there access to shade? All that stuff is in the trail assessment, and then just changes in surfaces if there is an amenity. So if you have a bench that's off to the side, are you staying on the same level surface or do you have to go down a step? If there's a water station, do you have to be able to go up to it, or are you able to access it from where you're at? And then amenities and site furnishing. So the possibility of guides, if an individual were to request one, is that something that's available? Water stations, interpretive guides, so if they needed help, and then just benches along the way. So then at the end of each trail assessment, when we shared the findings with the partners that we were working with, we also sent them a survey and asked them to fill out the survey. So we'll go through these results. So the first question, asking them to describe their current knowledge of trail accessibility. So basic knowledge, minimal knowledge, and no knowledge. And this was before the trail accessibility. So this one kind of met my standards of where I was thinking people would be at. And then the collaboration with me as the capstone student, improving their understanding of accessibility. As you can see, mostly of them said strongly agree or somewhat agree. We did have options for them to say no, but I think that overall, most of them did improve their understanding of what accessibility means and really looking beyond that lens of just a physical disability. Moving into their understanding of the type accessibility options after working with me as the capstone student. Most of them, once again, said strongly agree or somewhat agree, which is important to me because one of our main goals was also to make sure that they're understanding that these accessibility options can go beyond what maybe is typically recommended, or maybe once again is not meeting every ADA standard, but we're still seeing it accessible for specific people. Their confidence in addressing trail accessibility increasing since they did a trail assessment with me. So I was also really happy to see that once again, they're either somewhat agreeing or strongly agreeing that they do feel more confident in addressing accessibility on an outside terrain, which can be very hard. And then how likely they are to make changes. So this one was interesting because we did reiterate to partners that we're not coming in to try to make changes. It's really about being transparent about what you have. So even if they were not willing to make changes based off of the trail assessment, that was okay, just as long as they were presenting the information clearly and factually. So then that way an individual with a disability can look at the information that they provided and decide if this place is feasible for them or not. And then the biggest barriers to making changes. So this is just a word map going through some of the results. A lot of times people brought up things like cost, uh, prior prioritization and budgeting, time and money, the bureaucracy of things, funding, collaborating with different organizations. So if they have to collaborate with, let's just say, national parks, or maybe they have a volunteer group that does all of the changes in their community. So just figuring out where the work has to go through first, um, in different municipalities that they work with. So um, this one was my favorite, extremely likely to utilize the tool in the future. Like I said, I really hope that more people are going to utilize this tool in the future. I think for the most part, we've tried to make it extremely user friendly. So I definitely think it will be a great tool for everybody to use. Um, and then this was just an opportunity for them to express any other things that they had. So a lot of times they gave feedback about the item descriptions or how they plan to use the assessment tool in the future with other partners, that they were happy to be involved, and that they were providing details and information with sharing to other people in the community, which was very helpful as well. So now I'm going to pass it back to Amanda Baker, who will talk to our lived experience.
Yes, I am going to invite Amanda to join us here and talk through some of what she experienced in the project and working with Hannah. So thank you again, Amanda, for participating in this with us as one of the Trailtown pilot program partners. She was first on board for saying she was interested in participating in this. So we thank you for that. Amanda, can you just share some of what your goals were in participating in this assessment with Hannah?
Well, we here in Blowing Rock, one of the biggest appealing pieces of this Outdoor NC project was being able to talk more and with better information about accessibility. So we were really excited to be able to work with Hannah so that we could learn firsthand about what kinds of things we need to be looking for, what kinds of things we would be talking about, and what kind of information we would be sharing with people to give them that better sense of how to make those decisions and which places they can experience the outdoors best. So just being able to have an interaction with someone who was an expert in something that we are not an expert in was a really valuable experience for us.
And I know when we were talking with a lot of different partners, the question came up about like, which trail do I choose? How do I start this process? So from your perspective, with this first trail assessment, what was the trail that you selected and how did you identify that? Was it already ADA accessible or were you looking for something that maybe hadn't been assessed before?
We narrowed it down to two trails that we thought were most accessible, because we felt like that would help us get a sense of things that we weren't seeing or that we didn't know to look for. So we ended up landing on Bass Lake Trail, which is a 1 mile loop. It's very flat. There's a ramp for access. There are restrooms. They are marked as accessible. So as far as we knew, it was probably our most accessible outdoor experience in terms of just a hiking trail or something that doesn't have a ticket price or something like that. So that was what made us choose Bass Lake.
Sure. What were some of your learnings from that experience getting out there on the trail?
Well, as Hannah was pointing out in her description of the assessment, there were a lot of areas that we hadn't really thought about, like how heavy the door is on the trash can. For example, like the Bass Lake is a national park service trail, so all of the trash cans out there are bear proof. And so they do have heavy doors on them, and that wasn't something that we had even really thought about. It's a necessary thing, but at the same time, Hannah was looking at it from a different perspective. So that was really helpful to be able to see small things like another thing that she pointed out was that a lot of the areas around the benches had become quite eroded in front of them, which made dips in front of the seating that might make footing difficult, or even exposed roots that had over time gotten to be quite a trip hazard, and someone with low vision might not be able to see those things. So, things like that that really emphasize, maybe we might want to move the benches, or maybe put something down in front of the benches that would improve that surface. So little things like that that we didn't see as barriers, but can absolutely be barriers to other people. It was just really great to have that pointed out to us, because Bass Lake is accessible, but there are ways that it can be improved. So we can take that knowledge and apply it to other things as well.
And I know you had quite a few people who joined you on this assessment, as did some of our other partners from state parks or town community members, people who may be able to make some changes after having learned from the experience. But who was it who came along with you on your trip and your assessment?
Yeah, it was pretty much our whole staff. So Tracy, our director, is very big on trying to make sure that the whole staff has the experiences that they need to inform their work. Because if it was one of those things where I was the only one that went, or Tracy was the only one that went, you're never going to be able to relay all the information that someone would get by being there. And they're also going to apply it to their work in different ways than you might think to explain it. So we had myself and Tracy there, as well as Lindsay and Tyler, who are our content manager and social media manager, respectively. So, when it comes time to build out our accessibility information on our website, that's largely going to fall to Lindsay. When we're communicating information about where to find accessible experiences, if that's through social media, that's going to be Tyler. So being able to have that experience to made available to the whole staff, that was really appealing. So we were excited to be able to all go and take advantage of that.
Absolutely. So I know each of you all have your role to play within your organization. How do you see your role within the destination and talking about outdoor spaces and what role you're playing as it comes to that being more accessible?
Yeah. So as the TDA, we're the marketing organization, so we don't really develop or build these trails. And when it comes to making things more accessible, the most we can, what we're hoping for is to be an advocate for those improvements, to perhaps fund some improvements along the way. But our biggest thing is going to be communicating to our visitor, because that's what we do as the TDA, is sharing that information. And I think it was in the original 2.0 workshop that the presenter said that TDAs are uniquely positioned to be a conduit of information between the destination and the visitors. And so that's where we stand in terms of being useful to this process, right? Is being able to communicate that and be that link between the stakeholders who are building all of these things and making these things beautiful and appealing, and hopefully also accessible. And then we can communicate what those experiences are and what opportunities there are for different people through our website, through our promotions, through our marketing, and through our social media. So
Yeah, and that's a really great point you bring up too with the communication side of it, because I know that some of our partners who initially participated in this were unsure about going out there and seeing what might be viewed as wrong or not the best way of maybe having the trail or the setup or parking or what have you. But being able to just communicate what is there, because anybody who visits the trail or anybody who visits these outdoor spaces are going to be able to see what you see when they get there or experience what you experience once there. So just communicating that in advance helps for that overall experience to be better, or help them select a different place that may be better for what their ability is. So that's really great that you all are working towards that. Have you identified any stakeholders in your community that may be able to help you in these efforts?
We are still working on that. So that was another of the tools that this program with Outdoor NC makes available, is those stakeholder lists and being able to build that out. Because I mean, sometimes it's really difficult to know how many people you actually know or have contact with until you see a list of, you need to have the contact information for this land manager or for this conservation manager or for this ranger station, or this group over here that does river work. And that's just in the conservation space. So you also have a lot of land developers who might be working with town projects, or just contacts at your local planning and zoning department. We know those people, but having all of that information together in a really organized way was not anything that we had ever taken the time to do. But it's going to be a massive asset for the rest of our staff, and potentially something that we can share with other people we're working with. Because you always have people coming in and out, you have changes in who's responsible for what. So it's always a good thing to have that information really organized. So we are currently working on sort of populating those lists that we got. So we're excited to be able to have that one place and start understanding where those different connections can be made and how we can reach out to those folks better.
Awesome. That is part of the toolkit that
Yes.
will be rolling out, definitely identifying some of those already ADA accessible locations and some of the stakeholders as a resource within your community. Do you think that having already done the assessment, that's something that your organization will utilize in the future, or potentially share with some of those stakeholders for using in the future as well?
I'm not sure. We're just now getting our toes into the process. So we're building out that information, because like I said, we're not, as being a marketing organization, we're not really in that space as much. So this is us kind of getting into that space and understanding if there is a place for us to work more closely with people and what that would look like. We do some funding for infrastructure improvements. So I'm sure that along the way, this process will probably inform how those decisions are made, or what kind of support we show, or what kind of possibly even parameters are put down for, what gets funded or what wouldn't be funded. Those are all board decisions, not ours. But yeah, I think that it definitely has some potential to inform some of our big projects going forward with other partners.
Yeah, that was one of the things with one of our other partners that participated in this, is they had selected a location as a potential place to do the trail assessment, and then realized that it was going to be changing in the next few months. So they were like, is it worth going and looking at it? And we were like, yeah, absolutely, because this could help inform some of those decisions in the redesign process of that. Especially if you're engaged in those conversations and what that looks like, whether it be additional parking because that beach access is always really busy, or different things like that. And then you brought up a really great point too about we're all tapped for our resources and our time and bandwidth, and we're not all DMOs have huge staffs. So in that perspective, finding those volunteers and stakeholders and people in your community that are also trying to achieve those goals would definitely help in those efforts too, as far as that goes. Well, thank you so much for participating in this assessment to begin with, and for your feedback along the way, as well as being part of this webinar here. I know we have a few questions in the chat here, or in the Q&A section. So I will hop over to that, unless we want to talk through any of the photos that that are popping up on the screen now. I think that was the picture of kind of the bare trash can there, and looking at what that looked like.
And the whole staff really was there. Tyler took the pictures, and Lindsay kept hanging back with Tyler. So yeah, they're not really in as many of them, but it was a good experience for the whole group.
Well, I will jump over to the Q&A then. I know we had one question that said, our community is putting in a large ADA playground at our sports complex. What are the best ways for the DMO to help promote this to potential traveling families, et cetera? And I think this is a really great question too, because there's things within your community that you can already promote and share to visitors for accessing that as well. So I don't know if you have listings currently that highlight that there is a sports complex there or that is an activity, but including that there is going to be an ADA playground there is accessible for visitors would be one of the first steps in doing so. I think communities play a large role in this as well, having community awareness. So if someone goes into a restaurant or is renting a different type of adaptive equipment or things along those lines, to explain to them that there are also these resources in the area as well. And then there will be some additional tools as far as for communication on your website and different ideas or language that you might want to utilize in order to help get that information out in front of the public. And that'll be rolling out with the rest of the tools in late May. And then we've got another question here. This one could go for Hannah and Amanda as far as how long does it take to do an assessment of a trail? So maybe Amanda, from your perspective, how long did it take to walk through that trail assessment with Hannah, and then Hannah overall with your project, what that looked like?
Since our trail was a 1 mile loop, and ahead of our walk, Hannah looked around at some of the bathroom facilities, and we walked a little bit down the access points and discussed some things there. So however long it would normally take you to slowly walk the trail, and then plus some sort of before and after discussion, like maybe 10-15 minutes is what it felt like on both ends. So just depends on, it probably depends on the trail you're doing, but the slowest walk you'll do and then just a little bit of discussion seemed to be how long it took us.
Yeah, I would bounce off that and say, from a time perspective, if it's your first one and you watch the webinar and you're going out there, maybe shoot for 30 minutes for like bathrooms and amenities, depending on how many that you have at your facility. But I'd say probably about 30 minutes there, and then maybe 30 to 40 minutes per mile, because like Amanda said, you are going to walk it slow. I think that the more trail assessments that you do, the faster that you'll get. But I think it's also too taking the time to think, going back to all those different kinds of disabilities that we're trying to look out for. So even if you have to go through it twice, especially if you have a shorter trail, like maybe you're walking it once with the lens of, okay, I'm going to look at this terrain and imagine that I didn't have 20/20 vision, and now I'm going to go back and like what am I hearing when I'm on the trail? So 30-40 minutes per mile and 30 minutes for the amenities is probably what I'd shoot for your first time, and then hopefully get better, and you pick up on more things as you do more of them.
And a question here was, who should DMOs invite to be part of a trail assessment? Does someone from a medical background need to be part of the assessment? I know I mentioned earlier that some of the different partners that participated in the trail assessment had their community members, from town partners to state parks to other members of their staff. But Hannah, do you want to expand on this as well?
Yeah, so I think the more people that you can bring, the better, not only so that they can learn how to use the trail assessment tool itself, but so you can start to foster those communications and those conversations around accessibility as a whole that can be applied to any terrain outside of outdoor trails. So like Amanda said, bringing in community partners is always a really good idea. Anybody that has some sort of stakehold in that trail itself, and then also inviting people that maybe have a disability in your community that utilize the trail would be a great person to invite out on the assessment with you. That way they're able to show you from their perspective what they're looking at specifically, if you have the ability to do that. Some of the people that we partnered with in this capstone, Adventure Ways in Asheville, they were really great about looking over the assessment and kind of giving me their perspective. We're looking to do Easter seals, just getting their perspective as well. So anybody that you also know has shared missions and values with promoting accessibility would be a good person to also invite out on the trail. I don't really think a certain number is too much. I think if you're all there to learn, you could do it together.
And another comment kind of question here is, am I understanding correctly that this tool may not necessarily make a trail ADA compliant, but rather will help us identifying and then sharing what barriers one may encounter if using this trail, i.e. there are stairs that are 1/4 a mile into the trail from the starting trailhead. And yes, that would be absolutely what this
Yeah.
is looking to achieve.
Yeah, definitely goal of overall transparency. So the tool, looking at it, it's not completely ADA accessible, it's not completely universal design, it's not completely userable design. It pulls principles from all of those designs, but to go out and actually make every trail, every specific ADA compliant would be very time consuming and also very tedious. So we looked at it from being transparent with the consumer, but also being able to utilize this tool in a time effective manner and still get out the information that you need to get out with it. So yes, you're really just, you're sharing also what could be a facilitator to some might be a barrier to others. So just because it has steps doesn't mean that your trail is bad. It doesn't mean that your trail has a whole bunch of barriers. You're just being honest about what is there so they know what they're going to have when they get there.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point to not to make assumptions about anybody's willingness to accept any sort of challenge. What might be challenging for me might be different for Hannah. What might be challenging for others in your community might be easy. So looking at it from their perspective and allowing everybody to make their own decisions based on their abilities. And then let's see, we have another question. This might be one, Amanda from Blowing Rock, you might be able to advise as well on, but as a county commissioner, what can I do? What role could I play in making sure our walking trails are accessible for all citizens, with a focus on citizens who are living with disabilities? One resource that I might encourage you to reach out to is the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. They are actually having some assistive technology pop-up events taking place across the state of North Carolina. So you could connect with other individuals who supply or have resources from adaptive equipment like North Carolina Wildlife and their track chairs or North Carolina Resources, as well as ADA playgrounds and universal design and things like that, in order to really get engaged with the community in that aspect of things. But I don't know, Hannah or Amanda, if you have additional thoughts around that. Not to put you on the spot.
I was gonna let Hannah go first.
Okay.
Oh, so as far as like playing a role, I think one of the biggest things that we've noticed on some of the trail assessments is just the fact that accessibility can sometimes be a hard topic. So I commend you for just wanting to focus on people in your community that are experiencing a disability and wanting to promote that. I would say, because you're a county commissioner, keep talking to like stakeholders in your community, talk to people that are out there, get these conversations flowing, and then naturally people will start to think more and more on ways that they can make things more accessible, not even just for walking trails specifically, but just in your community. So I think you're definitely like on the right path, doing the right things.
Yeah, that for our role as the TDA, a lot of that is going to be talking about those opportunities and sort of prioritizing which things we highlight or feature. So I would think that as a commissioner, just making sure that you are, like Hannah said, voicing that concern and that dedication to having a role in improving those access points and just bringing it up and making those conversations happen. And, maybe even encouraging projects that would prioritize those kinds of experiences for folks. Because, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that people are gonna, they'll build different things, or they'll develop different trails or outdoor experiences or whatever. And, you just, the whole thing is talking about what they offer, right? Giving that true expectation of what's there. Because so much of what someone's experience will be is wrapped up in what their expectation was. So if you keep saying that this experience is accessible, but you're not really defining that, and you're not really giving that much detail, then someone who is just taking your word for it without that kind of detail might not have a very good experience at all. And that's going to really impact how someone feels about a trail or an outdoor experience.
Really great points.
Yeah.
I have another question here. Where is the best place to list the barriers for trail users? Signage can be expensive. Are QR codes with redirects to website a good practice and or becoming more acceptable? I think this is a really great question and something worth determining what works best for your trail, your destination, your area. I do think that having the information available on websites is a great way of doing it. And I think Hannah had a great point too on one of the trail assessments about having, maps along the way, different access points for the information, depending on where someone might be coming into from the trail or beyond the trail. One thing I've been reading recently about QR codes is just the safety of QR codes and people using them in a public space. And if there is access to somebody potentially changing the QR code to redirecting it to another location. So that might be something to just be aware of. But I do think websites, online resources are a great asset to us, especially with as things change. Seasonally is one way we were looking at some of the trails, and if that information might need to be updated based on each season throughout the year. So Hannah, Amanda, do you have additional thoughts around that?
I also think when you're thinking about this, when you're doing a marketing or designing for your websites or wherever you currently list the trails, think about it from that perspective too. So one of the things that we looked at on the trail accessibility checklist itself is, if I was a user and I go on to look up your trail, is the trail name and then the address that you give on the website, and then where I put that in my GPS, does it take me directly to the trail? Does it take me to the road that the trail's starting on? So wherever you give that address and you're listing your trail names and whatever trail features you list, I would just go ahead and list them there, because that's probably going to be the first place that they're going to go, unless they're just driving by, which could be something that you think about possibly having at the site as well. But if it's something that they're looking up and they're saying, okay, I'm going to maybe go out and check out Bass Lake Loop, for instance, the one that we did with Amanda, the first thing I did was look it up and look up the address of it. So putting it there is probably a good place to start, just because that's probably the first place they're going to go.
Yeah, we're definitely encouraging people to plan ahead and be prepared when they go to these outdoor spaces. So the more information we can get in front of them before they get there, probably the better experience they're going to have overall. But that's not to say that there shouldn't still be information on site. But as far as providing that, if others in the community have been successful and want to share those stories with me, I'd be happy to help share them out with other partners around the state, or continue those conversations with Bobby with Tourism Impact Services and others on our team as well. And let's see, are there any other questions? Not seeing anybody other questions here. But I really want to thank everybody for their time. If you do have additional questions, here is our names and contact information. So feel free to reach out to us and continue the conversation. More information will be coming out, like I said, in late May, with additional context for not only this tool, but other tools in helping us achieve our goals of making and communicating that our North Carolina outdoor spaces are more accessible for all. So Thank you all.